The Curse of Crony Capitalism. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Well, what's wrong with cronies? Cronies are friends. It's good to have friends, isn't it? Well, yes, it is good to have friends, but it's not good to have crony capitalism. See, when we say capitalism, we assume there's two words that precede it. That's free market capitalism. So in crony capitalism, where cronies or friends get favors, it's not free, because you're not free to exchange goods with whom you want. Adam Smith called it this natural desire to truck and barter. Well, that natural desire to truck and barter, according to Adam Smith, gets interrupted by cronies or by friends of government who can truck and barter where others cannot. So it's not free. And crony capitalism is not a market, because by definition, a market is where a buyer will buy and a seller will sell. Well, at crony capitalism, that equilibrium point gets drawn above the natural equilibrium point, and so it's not free market capitalism. The current Pope Francis, in one of his encyclicals, says capitalism kills. And he goes on to explain that capitalism is bad. You have to wonder how somebody as educated and as powerful and as resourceful as Pope Francis could misunderstand this. You know why, I think? Because he came from Argentina, where they have crony capitalism. So to him, capitalism does not mean free market capitalism as it does to most of us Americans. To Pope Francis, capitalism means crony capitalism, where friends of the government get special favors. You have to believe that's his misunderstanding of free market capitalism, because he's a very informed, educated person. So all countries have corruption, right? There's actually something called the Corruption Perceptions Index done by Transparency International. I watch this a little bit when I teach international courses especially. And so, of course, you want to know who's number one. Well, the country that is the most free of corruption is Denmark. 4 of the top 10 are Scandinavian countries. That's because they're small and homogenous, but that demands another podcast to explain the difference between these small, homogenous Scandinavian countries and a large, diverse country like the United States or any other one you might talk about. Now, so the United States, we're number 23 in 2020. That's not bad. I mean, number 1 is Denmark. New Zealand is number 2. We go down to 23. We've moved up actually from 69 in 2019 to number 23 in 2020. See, we're getting closer to the top. My prediction is, and it's a pretty easy prediction to make, in 2021, our Corruption Perceptions Index ranking will go down because of all the money that is being spent this year in the COVID-19 pandemic. See, it's almost a perfect correlation. The more money government spends, the more corruption there is. I mean, it'd be hard to argue the opposite, wouldn't it? I mean, it's just absolutely true. So the more money you put into the system, the more difficulty you're going to have spending it in a free market way, and you're going to have more cronies involved. So in the 8 years of the Obama administration, there were many scandals. Just 2 come to mind. One was Solyndra. They received a $535 million government loan guarantee, and President Obama said, companies like Solyndra are leading the way toward a brighter and more prosperous future, end quote from President Obama. Solyndra never did turn a profit and filed bankruptcy. In an unusually corrupt deal, stockholders were paid before the taxpayers when they went bankrupt. The taxpayers, that's us. One of Solyndra's biggest backers was the George Kaiser Family Foundation, whose namesake is an Oklahoma oilman who bundled campaign contributions from multiple sources for Mr. Obama's 2008 campaign. Hey, I'm not picking on President Obama. I'm just trying to give you the idea what is crony capitalism, and that's an example. Another example is Obamacare. In Obamacare, there were 1,200 groups who received exceptions from Obamacare, from the Affordable Care Act, probably in violation of constitutional law. They weren't fulfilling the law. The unions weren't the only cronies to get a special Obamacare break. Insurers who went along with the Affordable Care Act from the beginning in order to expand markets from previously uninsured populations on the taxpayer dole didn't want any of the same medicine for themselves. Good use of the word medicine, right? So 10 giant health companies, insurance companies, including Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, and Aetna, went to the White House and received waivers. So we've only been talking for 5 minutes here. We have 2 examples from the Obama administration. From the current Trump administration, it's tariffs. Well, whenever you put on a tariff, there's going to be exceptions offered by the administration. And President Trump put the tariffs on, then gave an exception to Apple, saying, well, they shouldn't have this tariff. Mr. President, nobody should have the tariff. That's the point. You're messing with the market here. And somebody like Apple, who has the ability, who has the influence to come to the White House and talk to the president, will get an exception. This is crony capitalism. Yeah. So the government is supposed to provide for the general welfare. In crony capitalism, the government provides for individual welfare. That's really the best definition you can have. And so why does this happen? Well, because of the fallen nature. Creation, fall, redemption. We believe humans are fallen. Therefore, you want to give them very little decision-making authority. So the more authority they have, the more corruption you're going to have. In an upcoming book titled Biblical Economic Policy by Dave Arnott and Saydometov, we identify 10 commandments of economics, as we call them, and 3 of them apply to this issue. The first one is don't steal. Well, in crony capitalism, people are stealing from others because in economics, we call this opportunity cost. Now, that money that got spent either via Solyndra or in the Affordable Care Act or in Trump's tariffs exceptions for Apple, all of those were opportunity costs. Those dollars could have been spent in another way. See, that's how we economists think. And we think that when you spend it on your cronies, when you give favors to cronies, there's somebody else who didn't get that money. And that's stealing. That's not fair. One of the other 10 commandments of economics we find in that book is honest measures. Well, this is just too easy. I mean, that's not an honest measure for the government to overpay or to give grants to people who are their friends. That's just not an honest measure. And so those are just 2 of the 10. Here's one. Okay. Willie Sutton was a bank robber. When he was asked, why does he rob banks? He gave an interesting answer. He said, because that's where the money is. Okay, pretty simple answer, right? In this little book called Economics in the Christian Worldview, I write, Willie Sutton answered 2 questions when he said, because that's where the money is. He answered question number 1, why I rob banks, and question number 2, why the 5 richest counties in America are suburbs of Washington, D.C. Why? Because that's where the money is. Why are the 5 richest counties in America suburbs of Washington, D.C.? Because that's where the money is. I'm not even alleging that the federal bureaucrats are rich. I'm alleging that lobbyists live in those counties and get paid a lot. Why? Because that's where the money is. Look, the more honey you put in the pot, the more bears you're going to have surrounding the pot. And these are lobbyists. That's why that fact is true. See, and it's just going to get worse because of the COVID crisis. We've created more money, and more money is being spent. It's almost a perfect correlation. The more money that gets spent, the higher corruption is, right? So what do we do about this? We as Christian worldview people say that people have the fall. Well, we could do either one of 2 things. Number 1, we could find politicians who are not fallen. Good luck with that, because the scripture says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So you can't find non-fallen people. Or we could give politicians less money. See, that's it. The less money there is in D.C., the less people will be there on the dole, so to speak, or be there to get those kinds of crony capitalist favors. There's a Dennis Prager video that's really good by Jay Cost. Jay Cost of the Weekly Standard on a 5-minute Prager University video says, capitalism is moral because it is premised on a voluntary exchange between independent parties. He doesn't give the other half, which I will give for you. Crony capitalism is immoral because it's based on a non-voluntary, meaning a forced, exchange between non-independent parties. See, there's not this distance between them. Since I'm talking about Prager, this is a quote I've heard him say many times. Look, he says, if you say a pox on both of your houses, in other words, I don't like Democrats, I don't like Republicans, I don't like any politicians. Prager has an interesting answer from this. If you don't like politicians from either party, you should vote for the one who promises to do less, because that gives them less power. But we continue to vote for those who promise more. That means more corruption and more crony capitalism. Dennis Prager's right about that. We were warned about it at the beginning, early parts of my life, back in the 60s, by Dwight Eisenhower when he was leaving the presidency. One of his big warnings was the military-industrial complex, meaning if you build this, there's going to be corruption. People will want to favor themselves at the expense of others, and that's what he was talking about. So, look, much of what government does is not biblical. I don't have time to do all this today. I've only got 2 minutes left. But if you look at them in order, number one expenditure of the federal government is health care. I've talked about that in podcast number 15. Number two is Social Security. I don't think there's good arguments, biblical arguments, for the government doing either. I talked about that in number 15. I'll talk about Social Security in another one. Number three is defense, which I think is a legitimate expense of the federal government. Number four is interest on the debt, which is going to get more because it looks like we've increased the debt by about $4 trillion just this year. And that's not biblical. So look, 3 of the 4 biggest expenditures of the federal government, it seems to me, as a Christian economist, are not biblical. Healthcare, which I've talked about in podcast 15, Social Security. Number 3 is defense, which I think is biblical. Number 4, interest on the debt. I talked about that in podcast number 8. And it's just going to get worse and worse. Look, yeah. So crony capitalism is a curse. Why is it a curse? Because it violates the free market capitalism principles. In the other course I teach at the university is called Strategic Management. We talk about this and we call it the agency problem, meaning an agent is supposed to be an agent for the organization he or she is representing, but they often become an agent for themselves. This is what crony capitalism is. People seeking their self-interest at the expense of group interest. In the Christian worldview, we say it's because of the fall. Yeah, look, I did my dissertation many years ago on the U.S.-Russian joint ventures. And at the time, they had this phrase in Russia, an FOB. It meant a friend of Boris, meaning Boris Yeltsin. If you were a friend of Boris Yeltsin, you had favors. And there was a really huge scandal called the loans for shares, which was just a huge crony capitalist system, which produced today in Russia, still 26 years later, 26 years after I did my dissertation in 1994, still the cronies, the friends of the government, own most of the major corporations. They're stuck like we were with the robber barons of 120 years ago in the United States, with a few people owning the large industries. And those are the cronies. Those are crony capitalists, okay? So the curse of crony capitalism, it is a curse because it robs, it is stealing, it is not honest measures. Yeah. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian economist, where our slogan is, fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time.